All right. How's it going?
Going good, Daniel. How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good, Marshall. It is a long time coming.
I know we've been talking about this for months, haven't we?
Yeah, we really
Yeah.
have. Life things
Yeah.
have impeded it at times, but we're here, and that's all that matters. And hopefully, it's the start of something. Hmm.
A long journey, many episodes, hopefully.
Indeed, indeed. And that's, I think, kind of what we can roll into first is sort of the vision for this podcast. We'll let you start with
Sure.
what your some of your ideas.
Um, okay, so the philosophy for this podcast, I think that this podcast is going to be about learning, about being real with what we don't know, being upfront about what we don't know, and just allowing our mind to play and discover with each other. And you know I want to go get some primary sources, some books, do some articles. Maybe we'll even watch videos and critique videos. But um the basically, I guess this is a philosophical kind of intellectual podcast where we're just kind of talking about ideas more so than other things, politics. I think we'll go into politics. We'll go into everything, but
Unavoidable.
very theoretical. I'm sure this will be, and yeah, just um, I'm excited. I'm really genuinely excited, Daniel, to just do these episodes with you and explore concepts. And if other people like it, other people like it. But I'm just going to enjoy this personally. So
Yeah, I could say the same. Likewise, regardless of where this podcast goes or anything with that, I'm truly excited just to like go on this journey together and exploring the life of the mind. Yeah, I think I kind of have somewhat of the same vision, which is where we do have some similarities. I would say is our vision, at least for this, and we'll start with that. Definitely, we're going to come both, I think, from a place of Socratic ignorance,
yeah,
in that I'm just gonna, we're here to learn. Um, it's kind of an introductory thing in that sense, and we each have our areas where perhaps we're stronger than each other, or just in general, I guess. But yeah, it's going to be a journey. I'm a fairly open-minded person, for better or for worse. But I want to use this as a platform to demonstrate and work on various intellectual virtues, mainly dialoguing, just practicing the dialectic, really. And I'm really excited for that. But I think what we could probably roll into, unless you have anything to add, is maybe a little bit about us, a little bit about of our backgrounds, both maybe a little bit personal, but mostly intellectual. I
sure,
personally believe the two are deeply intertwined, but
sure.
and maybe just to kind of establish where where there's some distinctions, where our views kind of diverge, and where we differ presuppositionally as well. We're almost perhaps starting from different points. But I think maybe that's a good place to kind of start, and it doesn't have to be comprehensive, just kind of to jump into things, I guess. Um,
Sure,
yeah.
sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the kind of selling points of this podcast. By the way, is just
Yeah.
so Daniel and I we share the same love of learning and reading and understanding ideas, um, trying to expand our consciousness. Just by having new ideas, new ways of thinking. But yeah, I think fundamentally we definitely have some differences, which is going to be interesting. Which is it makes our conversation so cool because we have different perspectives, axiomatically.
Right.
So axiomatically, I'm an atheist, proclaimed. That's what I believe. That's what I am convicted of. I kind of have a weird view that, and a lot of people don't like this, but I kind of don't believe in agnostics. I think that maybe they wake up one day and they're more swayed, they're more religious. The next day atheist, I think it's kind of hard to not have a standpoint. It just that kind of limbo, that limbo state is hard for me. Now, when people say they're agnostic, of course, I don't like critique or anything. I just personally am saying, because a lot of the times a criticism with atheism I've found is it's, how can you be sure? Why would you not? It's more consistent to call yourself an agnostic. It's more intellectually consistent. And I don't know. I think you pick a side and you go with it. So that's, I guess, a big axiom of mine. Another thing I talk about that kind of molds my thinking is that I'm, I guess, a materialist, a physicalist, especially in the realm of consciousness. And that's a very big area of interest for me. And I tie a lot of my thoughts to that. I kind of go back to that. So like notions of the soul, things like this, I really like to try and rework them because, again, I come from a place where I think there is just the material. But I try and rework these kind of Christian ideas because I do think they are, rich in symbolism and very universal, powerful messages. So what I try and do is take those things and, as I say, rework them. I believe in artistic truths. That's a thing I've said. There's like the soul, the notion of the soul. So for instance, I conceptualize the soul to be the fusion of your subconscious morality and your unconscious morality with your conscious morality. So that's why, and that's, the soul has intuitional power. It places intuition into people. And so there, but ultimately I think it's more of a physical notion, but artistically I accept the soul. I rework the soul and then I accept it. So I do that with concepts. You'll get a fair bit of that throughout our dialogues, but essentially, axiomatically, I don't believe in a divine figure or a literal transcendent. And yes, I like to tie a lot of things to the material manipulation of the brain, say, that can completely variegate your existence. That's a super fascinating concept to me that I go back to all the time. So yes, I guess axiomatically that's kind of what people need to know about me, where I'm coming from, because those are themes that are going to recur throughout this entire podcast.
Awesome. It's, I don't know if I am envious of this, but it's almost as if you're stronger on certain positions than I am in some of my own, which I respect, given I have a penchant for relativism a little bit, but I'll get into that. That's a very loaded term. But I guess a little bit about where I am intellectually is, well, we'll start with the dichotomous element of this podcast is that I do consider myself a theist, and not just a theist, but a Christian. Namely, I believe in the triune God, creator of the universe, revealed in his son, Christ Jesus, a real man, but also God, who died on the cross and then rose 3 days later. These are things I believe. Whether I have evidentiary proof, as some in the apologetics fields try so assiduously to obtain, I'm not totally sure. And to be quite honest, I fall fairly in many different spots along the theological spectrum. I consider myself a Protestant, perhaps a wayward evangelical. I am influenced by Reformed thinking, but then it's alternative, even things like open theism. I'm open to theological exploration, and that doesn't mean there's no room for skepticism within my worldview. And I would say that I've experienced a lot of it. So but at the end of the day, it usually I come to a sort of existential Christianity, one that is a leap, a Kierkegaardian leap. Um, but a lot of that's tied into my background. I mean, I grew up very conservative Christian. But and some of that has come into tension with my love for the life of the mind. And we'll see. And I do deviate from perhaps even a lot of traditional Christian thought on various philosophical things. Again, I'm a bit more relativistic in a lot of ways. I perhaps we'll see. I am skeptical of things like natural law, other items like that. I'm more historicist in some manner, as in I do believe a lot of things are a product of their material time and place, which is a similarity. Is I'm probably a bit more materialistic um, than perhaps the average Christian. I would say I'm closer to you in that sense, and I think a big tension in my thought is and something I want to explore more is kind of the notion of the soul and the notion these battles between idealism, materialism, and what makes up the real. What is the metaphysic? But that, such as to say, I have a huge interest in history. Um, my dream, I guess you could say, to put it kind of cheesily, is to be an intellectual historian one day. It's probably my favorite type of history, is the history of ideas and placing ideas within historical context, seeing how those ideas were influenced by that context, and vice versa, and exploring just the lives and the dreams, the hopes, just the experiences of those who have tread this earth before us. And I could get in. I won't go down the philosophy of history rabbit trail or anything like that, but that's definitely something I want to talk about a lot. And again, grounding things historically, and probably I'll probably end with one of my biggest presuppositions right now is that ideas don't necessarily happen in a vacuum, and I think that's some people do believe in this the a priori reasoning that
Innate.
just yeah, exactly, that there's just innate reasoning that happens, and I'm highly incredulous towards that view, or I have a high degree of incredulity towards that view. Um, but anyways, if you know
Brilliant.
anything, yeah, if I was about to say, if you know anything about me, I tend to ramble. I tend to be all over the place.
No, that was brilliant.
But yeah, no, that's kind of where I'm at, I guess. But
Yeah. If these
yeah,
introductions didn't get people hot for the podcast, then just turn away.
yeah, exactly.
If because I think we both did a pretty damn good job. So if that
Yeah,
didn't work, just it's okay. This is probably not going to be the podcast for you. So
yeah,
yeah, I like this. I really I want to. I'm excited to explore this existential Christianity that you have. There was one big point, that I don't know where I come. I think I was reading a Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on religious experience. Like a couple, I was reading it. I read it a couple days ago for my philosophy class. I'm a student, by the way. And it was talking. Yeah, it touched on kind of a point that you brought up that I think is important, and it's partly why I enjoy conversations with you so much. Is like you said, how apologetics oftentimes really tries to prove something with reason, and the whole, you say you're not that interested in that. It's more of just your faith is a faith. At least that's how I am understanding it, like a kind of Kierkegaardian way, a kind of Kierkegaard way of looking at things, because he criticized that heavily, didn't he? That idea that you could prove something like this that was, like, by definition transcendent and so
mhm.
beyond the human capacity. Is that
Yeah.
kind of
I,
fair?
I think so. I mean, to my knowledge, the impetus of his project was refuting Hegel, at least part of it, because
Mm,
Hegel brought with him the absolute ideal was a comprehensive explanation of everything.
yeah,
And I think,
teleology.
and again, and I'm no Hegel scholar by any means. but or even a Kierkegaardian scholar. I wish I could say I was. It's two figures that I still am in reading or needing to read more. But I think it was kind of this rebellion against a systematized, excuse me, systematized order or a systematized uh just worldview in a way. I don't know. I might be wrong there, but I think it was just the certainty that they brought and almost the hubris. I think offended Kierkegaard in many ways.
Hubris.
Yeah, and I think it was the Promethean attempt to essentially explain everything as a finite creature, as a creature trapped within its own limitations, to assume that what those can be transcended through this connection with the real or the absolute ideal. I'm kind of mixing up some things, and any scholars of Hegel will probably quickly trounce on what I'm discussing. So, but we'll get to you, I promise. But I think so. So long answer for that question. But yeah, I think so. I think it maybe perhaps was a rebellion against established, and also a rebellion against established religion. His famous attacks on the Church of Denmark and these Christians who they'd never really met Christ. They hadn't stood bare before being, so to speak.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Cool.
But yeah.
Well, one episode we could. I've got it right here. Fear and Trembling. We
Yeah.
could.
Yeah.
It's not super long either. Really, this edition, like 40 pages, is an introduction by the translator. So this is kind of a short little essay. We could do that one and do a whole episode just kind of going over it. And I'm looking right next to me on my little desk. I've got like some Hume. I'll just kind of take people through some books that we might be open to reading and discussing. So Kierkegaard, there's some Hume. I really want to get to this one, Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. I have not delved into Hume yet. I'm looking forward to Hume. Jung, we could do Answers to Job. Answer to Job. I hear this is really good. I haven't read this yet. Also, we could just do books in the Bible. Like we could read Job and talk about it. And then maybe we could read this Answer to Job and then have another episode like where we kind of revise our thought. We have our own, maybe we try and develop our own criticism of a piece and then then read someone else's criticism and then criticize their criticism.
Yeah.
What else? Like some Hawking, maybe we could do some history of time. I'm really not good with science though. My brain doesn't retain that information well, but some Einstein, just etc. Gödel, Escher, Bach. That's a big book. Nations and Nationalism. I'd probably need your help reading that. That's probably got a lot of history in it. Since 1780, Nations and Nationalism since 1780. So just various stuff. We could read. Maybe it'd be good each episode we could kind of say what we're reading currently. That might be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great perhaps discussion starter if we needed that, or at least just a good icebreaker, pretty mainly for ourselves to get the wheels turning, to get in the for lack of a better phrase, get in the zone, so to speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly.
With our meager podcast.
Yeah.
Let's go through
humble beginnings.
Yes. Let's go through just what we're reading at the moment.
Perfect.
Whether we're happy or dissatisfied with it. What are you reading at the moment?
So I'm reading a couple different things. So a book that I have taken kind of a bit of time on, mainly because it's fairly repetitive. So I mean, I will see if I get around to finishing it. It's called Introducing Radical Orthodoxy. It's by this author named James K.A. Smith. He is a theologian who studied Derrida. I feel like it's actually rather silly when people who speak English attempt to pronounce French names to sound intellectually superior. So I've
Yeah,
caught myself
I
there.
kind of share that with you.
Caught myself there. Derrida. So radical orthodoxy was a movement, an intellectual movement started by this guy named John Milbank. He is an Anglican theologian. He wrote a book called, I'm blanking on the title. It's social theory, something in social theory. I'll have to get back on that one. But the idea is he criticized heavily the space of autonomous reason, and he essentially posited that a lot of these intellectual movements, within especially sociology, are more something that is more heterodox, a heterodox position to Christianity, as opposed to something independent. It is essentially Christianity that's, and so the idea is that in introducing radical orthodoxy, the K. Smith goes through a lot of that, again, talking about how various philosophical movements essentially rip off Christianity in a way, and very much critiquing the idea of a univocal existence. So that means existence that is unchained to God, because they very much heavily focus on the idea of in him we live, in him being God, in him we live, we move, we have our being, that everything in some sense participates in God. And again, from maybe an outside perspective, it seems a little pantheistic right off the bat, which is kind of why I'm working through it a little bit.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty complex idea. Interesting.
Yeah. So that's one thing I'm reading, but he gets a little repetitive. It is an introductory book. Let's see, what else did I pull over here? So a book I recently finished is called, it's by Carl Becker. He was a historian in the 18th and 19th, late 19th, early 20th century. This is probably his most famous work. It's called The Heavenly City of the 18th Century Philosophers. And this is a pretty seminal piece, as it looks into the Enlightenment. It's not very long. It's a fairly short book. It's converted from lectures. It looks into some of the key thinkers of the Enlightenment, and you might start seeing a theme here, but he's demonstrating that they weren't necessarily bringing about universal ideas. In reality, they were very much reactionaries towards certain political structures, or how the Christianity had diffused power all across the land, and how those structures were perhaps oppressive in certain ways. And in their search for eternal man, or like universal man, in what they were still much more historically trapped than perhaps they thought. And in some sense, again, they kind of change the Christian story around a little bit, so to speak. So they, for example, Rousseau very famously said, men were born free, but everywhere are now in chains. You have this idea of being in the Garden of Eden, once born free, now in the chains of sin. And you see, it's almost like a humanistic version of Christianity. It kind of removes the personal God for, say, universal humanity. So love of God becomes love of universal humanity. And so he's been called a pre-postmodernist by some thinkers, in that he was essentially historicizing some of the Enlightenment thinkers, whatnot. And I definitely a great book.
Sounds really cool.
He's a great historian.
That was a good explanation, Daniel.
Yeah,
I feel like
you're on fire.
No, I'm not.
Great.
I feel weak right now. Lastly, so I feel like I'm going on ad nauseum, but I'll just do one more book. I know you said we're not doing as much political, but I am gonna get into it anyways, and I don't necessarily, it's not necessarily political. So a big shout out to author, social critic, Christopher Lasch. He is probably one of my most primary intellectual inspirations. He has an extremely I don't even know necessarily how to describe it. I just love the way he writes history. Um, and this book is called The True and Only Heaven, Progress and Its Critics. It's really his magnum opus. It's a pretty long book. I'm about halfway through. I'm just kind of picking it up again. I had read most of it, but then I stopped for whatever reason. And his idea is he's the whole book is critiquing the concept of progress in the Western world. It's this idea of, and it's connected to a lot of economic realities, but this kind of how has progress been understood historically. He goes over a lot of different historical movements within American history, but it really is, it's a book that if you want to understand the soul of America, which is another one of my interests, it's definitely a great piece. And so a little less explanation with that one. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I really wanted to share right now that I
What
brought
about the
with me.
post-structuralist book?
Yes, so I have the post-structural. I will do two more. I apologize. You
No,
can
you're
go
good.
as long as you want after
You're
this.
good.
So
You're doing, yeah, it's very interesting. You're doing a good job.
so we have I'm surviving on a little bit of my Mr. Caffeine. So I've been trying to get through the classic City of God, Augustine's
Augustine.
City of God. I've read parts of this, but I'm trying to get a full reading because, and I almost ashamedly am saying I haven't done a full reading, but it just within my initial readings of this book, I realized that growing up as a Christian, so much of my thought on so many things, not just strictly theological concepts, but just basic thinking about various life things or various spheres of life, like work or play, anything. So much of it can be found in Augustine, and his influence cannot be understated. His influence on not just the Christian thought, but on the entire thought of the West. Yeah, exactly. It's fairly, but and the truth is, I love Augustine is great. I mean, and I probably don't agree with maybe a lot these days, but it's still good stuff. And it's foundational in order to understand, if you want to understand the West.
Yes, I think just a comment on that. I haven't read him firsthand, but I have. I actually read this book a couple months ago. I recommend it. It's called A History of Civilization. It's intellectual history. You would eat that book up. It goes through everything from the first record and how ideas have changed and molded, and it's written in a very good way. But when he gets to medieval thought, and is it Augustine?
I think it's either one. I think
okay.
it's interchangeable.
I liked the notion. That was when I was kind of first exposed to this kind of existential Christianity, this kind of divide, this schism between the city of man and the city of God, and his kind of critique of the projects of the time that were occurring. I just found to be really interesting. But again, I only have a very, very passing knowledge of him. I want to read his Confessions.
Yeah, Confessions is seminal as well. Just as a extant work of psychology and really just establishing any notion of the self. Augustine is seminal for that. The last thing I'll say, another book that I'm worked through is, and is Perry Miller's The New England Mind, the 17th century. It's an intellectual history of the Puritans, fairly famous. And early in the book, he talks about, it's actually the first chapter, is called the Augustinian strain of piety, is what he calls it. And it's just this, and he describes it as this a mood in that and he says, an urgent sense of man's predicament from a mood so deep they can never be fully articulated. This idea that and then I'll go on. This idea that man is just something is off in the world, and that is that I don't know. It's just I wish I could actually explain this one better. Yeah, here it is. It is only too clear that man is not at home within this universe, and yet that he is not good enough to deserve better. He is out of touch with the grand harmony. He is an incongruous being among the creatures, a blemish and a blot upon the face of nature. This sort of self-degradation, but that is so Augustinian that, yeah, exactly. This idea of I'm unworthy, but yet grace transcends that unworthiness. And then you have this paradox. But yeah, so no, I realized we might have to do this in two parts.
We are going to have to.
Yeah,
I say we go ahead and start a new recording so that
yeah,
I don't
and then
to.
and yeah, you can and then you can go. So
this is actually good because I need to go get my books anyway.
Okay, I could actually do real quick. I could do the Poststructuralism in the next like 3 minutes.
No, let's save that because I want to go in depth with you on that, and because that's going to be a big topic that we'll record on.
Okay, sounds good. Let's end this, save it, and start a new one.
Yes, just send me another email.
Okay, I'll end this one, make sure it saves. Or stop recording, actually, is what I'll do. Stop this computer. All right.
All right, with the power of editing. We're back.
We are back, and now I apologize for my endless verbosity, and now it's time for you to engage us, my friend.
I know. Damn you, Daniel. Man, it was just so boring sitting there listening to you talk about those books, you know.
It's so my stuff is it's fairly niche. All kidding aside, it is pretty niche, and I'm trying to figure out a way to I think maybe my intellectual project will be to try to figure out how to get some of these ideas. I hate the word popular. I mean, maybe just get them condensed a lot of these ideas. Yeah, exactly. Revivify them and sort of combine and synthesize, and maybe that'll be my project. But anyways, enough.
Yeah. And jokes aside, I was really interested in those books. So yeah, I've just realized a lot of the books I have been reading, they're back in Bristol. They're back in a different place. I've been in Nashville, and I'm about to move back. So, but
if you just want to describe them,
I've got some.
Okay.
So currently, I'm reading A Season in Hell by Arthur Rimbaud. He's a French poet that he quit writing when he was 19. I mean, he lived a really depraved or just decadent life. And he wrote all of his poetry from like 15 to 19, maybe even 16 to 19. And then he dropped it all, and he was a gun runner. And then he got cancer and died at like 37. So, and he was born in like 1840. So he should have lived past 37. He just got unlucky, but he lived hard. Yeah. Now I'll say the story that surrounds him, the story that I just communicated, I think it really persuades people into thinking that his work is a lot better than it actually is. But also I do have to qualify here. I'm not a big poetry reader. I like elements of poetry. I love, like I'm writing a book currently. I love, metaphor, allusion, alliteration. I like a lot, all these things, but the way I write, what I write is it's just kind of prose pieces. It's more structured. So maybe that is a bit of it too, but still, and this is very anti-Christian, really, very blasphemous book. So I thought there'd at least be like a page that's interesting, that jumps out at me, and it's like, wow, you got balls, like you were saying that in the 50s, yeah, 1850s. But I haven't found that. I mean, I don't know the language. It's just. Is
it the translation, or do you think, or?
I don't know. I think it's just the way he's writing. I mean, some of it's pretty cool. I'm just jumping to a random page. Now, this is actually in meter. O seasons, O castles, what soul is without sin? the magic study I've made of happiness none can evade. To it each time, good luck, we hear the Gallic cock. No more desires for me, it has taken my life in fee. Charmed body, soul, and brain, delivered of every strain. So, I mean, there's lines, but I don't know, man. It's just
Underwhelming.
It's not punching me.
Yeah.
Now, the introduction to this edition is super good. The preface it's by Patti Smith, the preface, and it's like its own poem, really. In his confessional masterpiece, A Season in Hell, Arthur Rimbaud imparts the formula for the alchemical transformation of the soul, even as he simultaneously acknowledges the futility of acting upon it. No one could exact a more brutal analysis of this sublime scrap of illuminated consciousness than the poet himself. In his own private Gethsemane, he is at once savior and betrayer, extending one hand as he slyly withdraws the other. On sheets of gold, he spews of the loathsome sheets where he has lain with the fallen angel for laying. He beholds his ancestors, he berates his ancestors. Grappling with the civil war of his personality, he prays bitterly to be good, but he is not able. He ridicules his inventiveness, his weariness, his flowering heart, but believe it is not a pose, but a confusion. He is 19 years old, and within his cosmology, excrement and roses equally offend. That was a good line. Huh?
Yeah.
In his cosmology, excrement and roses. So her writing is better than Rimbaud, and it's really making his writing out to be just pure genius, and I don't think it is. But again, I don't really read poetry. Maybe I'm confused by the fact that there's some meter like I read of his, but most of the book is, it's actually just like prose.
Okay.
Maybe I'm just confused that it's in a prose format, but it's really kind of discombobulated. It's not conjoined logically a lot of the time. So maybe it's an error on my part, but anyways, pretty good preface though.
Yeah.
I had a really good time reading that preface.
Yeah.
Another one that so that's what I'm reading now. I'm gonna finish it, but this is one that I read. This is a very important book to me, Mortality by Christopher Hitchens. Have you read this?
I have actually not read any Hitchens. Yeah.
He is his style is just brilliant. In this book, he was writing this as he was dying. It's short. It's like 80 pages. And it's just sad the way it progresses. His thoughts get so, disoriented, and he just doesn't have the strength anymore. And there's also a part in here that I thought it was one of the first times you could say this. He said that he was, lying in his bed, sick, and he was watching debates, of himself when he was powerful and able, and just that's a relatively new sorrow, is that being able to view this immortality that we have, anything you can put up and capture a snapshot of yourself. So especially if I die slowly, I'm going to have a lot to look back on, and it is going to be a special type of sorrow. It would be one that I almost feel obligated to put myself through. It's one that would be too interesting to look away from, even though it might be like the most terrifying, sad thing you could ever imagine. I don't know. Death seems to be a real hell, and so that book highlights it well. And it's about 80 pages. So I'll reread that, and you should read it. It's a quick read.
Yeah.
It's witty. It's really good. It's really heartbreaking. We could do an episode on that. By the way, throughout this little section here, if you have any, if you want to jump in at any point, feel free.
Okay. I do want to read some Hitchens, just given his influence, especially among the millennial and Gen Z atheists, especially. And I think he's the special one of that new atheist
Oh,
crowd.
definitely.
I mean, granted, he's I haven't listened to a lot of his stuff. I don't necessarily have a super informed opinion about him or read, but just mainly because of the wit and the sardonic humor
Erudition.
Yeah, exactly. And his status is just a general intellectual. He's definitely the special one out of the four horsemen
Yes.
so that I could definitely say. And we definitely should do a death episode. I don't think we can avoid it. That was a
No,
joke,
we'll probably do 100
but yeah it's something unavoidable, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, dad joke, but no, continue with.
Okay.
But you could talk. Yeah.
So yeah, and just one more quick thing about Hitchens. I do love him, but he's not a philosopher.
Yeah.
And people confuse that. He sometimes he does, criticize wantonly things that he doesn't philosophically understand. He does rely on his rhetoric, but I mean, my God, if you could speak his rhetoric, if I had that tool, I try to cultivate such a tool, but man, he had like teeth. I mean, he was hungry. He was just really good. So anyways, but people confuse that when he goes into his religious debates. He's going in as a journalist. He's going in as someone that makes their money by criticizing and by criticizing something. So that's what I have a lot more to say about Hitchens, but I'll move on.
Yeah, and we will have to talk also a lot about that was a really interesting thing. I hadn't necessarily even thought of that, and I'm surprised I hadn't. Is that idea of looking back at yourself as you lay dying, and that's something I definitely want to think about more. But anyways, sorry, just to make sure for my own memory's sake, I had to interject there. But anyways,
yeah,
continue.
we will definitely do that. Many episodes on death. This is just fun. I'm having a great time.
Me too.
Another book that I kind of touch on here and there, another subject. I think we're doing a good job too, Daniel.
I think we are. I think this is fairly natural.
It is pretty natural. That's what we wanted. Another subject that I go to all the time here and there is just the Greek tragedies. I want to have all of them read, and that's really not hard to do because only about 4, Euripides, Sophocles, Aeschylus. I'm not going to pretend I can pronounce their names. Really, they're the only ones that their work was preserved, and that's about it. So it's very attainable to read all of the tragedies. But with tragedies and also with biblical stories and also with Shakespeare, but maybe less Shakespeare for this point. Just the you can't just read them, like you have to really like meditate on the knowledge that the writer possessed. And why is that? Why did an atavistic society possess such great insight into universal themes and eternal recurrences? How? I mean, the language is so beautiful, and we've become so docile and so lazy as humanity has progressed. And I definitely want to figure out why that is. I mean, I guess maybe all they really had were words to entertain them back then, so they had to come up with groundbreaking stuff. But I don't know. They were just smart. They were just smart people, super metaphorically rich. So I go back to the Greek tragedies every little while. When I don't have a clear idea of what I want to read at the time, I'll just spend a couple of days going through one of the plays, fill up some time. They're always fun. And then the book I read the Poststructuralism book, but I'll do that one next, and then we can go into just a little primer discussion on that. Before that, though, I read Beyond Good and Evil in full for the first time. I'd read excerpts and kind of got the tenets understood Nietzsche's tenets, but engaging with him for that period of time, I was reading about 2 hours a day, and I was getting through about 10 pages because I just really, really, really wanted to absorb his instinct. I really wanted to absorb his intuition and his style, as well as his philosophical concepts and his construction. I really like, he said in Birth of Tragedy that Nietzsche wanted to be the musical Socrates. And he kind of proclaimed himself to be, and I love that idea. That's what I try and do. I mean, I also am for anyone listening, I also am a musician. I'm in a band. We got about an album and a half written. We got demos recorded, and this summer we're gonna record the full album, and then I'm moving to Brooklyn with my band in October.
Oh.
So yes, so I try and do that too. I like I like my words. I like my reason to have flowers and and dark, all this imagery on it. That's how I like to think. That's how I like to live. So he does a lot of that. So I really haven't talked much about his philosophy. It's really hard with a book like Beyond Good and Evil because the aphorisms are very nonconformist. There's not there. I mean, it is broken up into different chapters on culture, what is noble. Now, the first chapter on the prejudice of philosophers is brilliant. I need to just go back and read that. And that's it's like a 20-page section. You should just read that section. I got a lot from him, a lot of insights in my experience reading, but just a very simple thought, this thought here, but it like exploded my brain. Just that all the past philosophers and people, apologetics, the study of theology, all this, it really fundamentally at its core, it presupposes a belief in opposite value. What is good is what is helpful for the body, the system. What is bad is what is harmful. They analyze morals that way, just Plato and all these cats, Boethius too. All these people, that is their presupposition, is opposite value. And I don't believe in some metaphysical opposite, some true absolute opposite. And he goes on to expand that, and then we get into subjective morality, but we'll save that for another discussion. But actually, that idea, that notion of there not being any opposites, is a very good segue into the last book I'll talk about that Daniel's reading currently, that I just finished. Yeah, there we go. Poststructuralism. This book, man, totally changed a lot of it. Just gave me so much to think about, so much that I've never been introduced to. Anybody that wants to, this idea of there not being an opposite is, of course, kind of that values are kind of subjective, is a very it's I guess maybe an axiom of postmodernism, poststructuralism. As you'll see, these things are very hard to define. These intellectual traditions, movements, they're especially postmodern and poststructuralism. It's hard to define. But the main idea it gave me is just this whole linguistic thing. This notion that consciousness, is a product of language, and language is inherited. We're the beneficiaries of Shakespeare and the Bible and all this rich tradition, the Greeks. And so,
yes,
really, without that past of recorded literature, I mean, our consciousness would be much more limited. And I wrote a piece about like psychedelic drug users. I don't have anything against psychedelic drug users, but this notion that you're expanding your consciousness by taking a drug. I wrote a whole piece on it, but I think the only way you expand your brain is by trying to get different, by studying different theories and different ways of life, because you're adding to your bank, you're adding to your pool. And just a brief aside on the psychedelic experience, where they say, oh, my consciousness has been largened. A lot of the time what they're referring to is just these kind of the voices that they'll hear, the thoughts, the battles they'll have within themselves. And that's they're hearing language. That's a product of the past. They bought into a system, a language system that allowed them to have consciousness. And all that is their sub and their unconscious kind of circulating around and doing its thing, for lack of a better word. So I'd like to do an episode on that, on psychedelic, on that idea specifically. But
agreed.
Yeah. What are you thinking about post-structuralism? This book here, this Oxford very short introduction.
It's a good very short introduction. It's definitely actually helped me articulate, at least in my mind, certain ideas that I was somewhat vaguely familiar with, or at least familiar with via things I heard on podcasts or through other mediums. I haven't done a lot of primary research on some of these thinkers that she introduces, but I'm familiar with some of the concepts, or at least some of these concepts are so ingrained within the thought of a lot of people I listen to, or people who are deeply opposed to that type of thinking. So I'm familiar with it in that sense, and she does a good job introducing it. And that was a good overview you did as well. I do think that there's something to this idea of being trapped within language, and that we can't necessarily break free of it. And I'm just getting to the part in the book, though, where it's almost as if it isn't a complete relativism. It's almost more just an acquiescence to the unknown, in the sense that it is acknowledging that if there is an objective reality, it is unknowable to the subject, the human, which is a whole thing we can get into about that. What is a human? What is a subject? Especially in the post-structuralist view, because the idea is structuralism is trying to find that universal man, trying to find those stories, those ways of acting that are historyless, that history essentially is used to find. But the whole idea is, and that's especially this Carl Becker, who I mentioned earlier, this idea that unfortunately a lot of times in trying to find that universal man, we usually read in our own ideas of who that is into history, and we're trying to pull out these things that we think are universal or natural, but in fact are just they're just a product of our own enculturation. And I do think how I can resurrect a Christian narrative from this, and this is not new, and I'm not claiming originality in this sort of thought, is understanding that the only universal truth is the man Christ Jesus, is God's revelation. God's revelation is the only thing that can transcend the boundaries, the confinements of language, culture. And that is a very loaded statement. I understand that.
I was going to say, let me get in there.
That is an extraordinarily loaded statement, and it's untested hypotheses. But it's just something again, because you get all into all these things about
Well, that has to be the only way,
a
right?
critical hermeneutic and these
Yeah.
ideas of perhaps then how is the Bible, is there one reading of the text? Is there meaning to the text outside of our own reading into it?
Mm.
You see, and that's, again, we're getting into some of these post-structuralist issues. But again, that was a huge, I realized the audacity of the claim I just
Well,
made.
here's the thing.
But I'm trying, I think it's maybe that was a very apologetic thing. And I think I kind of fell back on some things there. So, but we'll let you talk.
So again, obviously I contest your ability to substantiate that point.
Yeah.
But theoretically, I mean, theologically, that would be the only way, right? To bridge. I don't really see any other way. It's just got to be revelation, right? That's the only way you can, because we can't build a ladder to heaven. We have the ladder, or heaven has to send down a rope or something for us.
Exactly.
So again, I like I say, contest your ability to substantiate, but theoretically it all checks out.
It's something I'll work through. I realized it's there's inherent difficulty with that almost couldn't necessarily be presented as a meta narrative, in that it requires it's something that from the outside perspective perhaps can't necessarily even be conceived, which
right.
is
It's something
I'm going, yeah, and that's
that people reject. It's not. I guess you would say it's not quite a meta narrative because it doesn't occur universally in the human, right?
It is, and I'm going back to very basic presuppositional apologetics, or this idea of, even it's in the Corinthians, where the gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing, which, besides the fairly harsh language there, the idea is that and there's this idea that revelation can only be taken in. Revelation is it's something that is so transformative that you cannot understand it from the outside. But you see, I'm mixing a lot of theological traditions here, which is probably, I'm getting myself into trouble, at least in my own mind. But this idea of, does God regenerate someone first, or does someone make a choice? Does the universality of the gospel pierce through, break down barriers, and enable someone to imbibe revelation? And can that revelation even be understood apart from one's context? You see.
That's interesting stuff. We got to have episodes on. Maybe we could do an episode just on apologetics and its current instantiation, and how it's gotten to where it is now. One apologetic that I find very interesting is theodicy.
Oh yes,
I find theodicy so interesting because if its claims work out, if its conclusion is proved, that free will, by definition, that's why evil exists, because we have free will. There cannot be, if there was not evil, there could not be free will. And also the idea that through suffering and through pain, you learn and you have better virtue. And if you accept that as a Christian, that leaves you with no comfort, in my eyes. If evil is justified in that sense, you're left without comfort. You're left without, you can't be sure that your faith will protect you from great tragic evil. You have to just hope. I don't think you can really go and petition to God any longer. At that point, it's just part of the game. And so that makes it renders life bleak, and kind of sucks all the hope out of things. Or you reject it, but I don't really see how. I mean, I'm sure there are other apologies here, but The whole free will, that notion of that, there has to be evil for there to be free will. And, this idea that you learn, there's virtue through pain. Yeah, anyways.
Very difficult. I feel like an embodied stereotype here, but the problem of evil is, again, one of the most difficult things to reconcile with a traditional theistic worldview. And again, everyone says that, but it's true.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something universal to that then, or I don't know, but I personally have major issues with much theodicy, in that I have a very hard time attributing evil to God, and seeing, because people kind of so flippantly are like, yeah, this happened because God wanted, it's like God wanted this to happen to gain this better virtue, whatever. But it's like, to me, what there's difficulties within that. But then we also can get into, how do we understand evil? Are we even in a position to understand what evil is? We could start with something very simple like suffering. But then again, we could get a major theme we'll probably talk about in the future, is this idea of suffering being necessary for greatness, which is a very popular Nietzschean sentiment, popular sentiment attributed to Nietzsche.
Right.
Is like this idea,
what doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
Yeah. So, and perhaps there's some level of truth to that, but we were the meeting time is waning again.
I think this time we respect it.
Yeah,
because I think we've had a brilliant discussion.
Yeah,
I really do.
It's
Again, we can say things like that because we're not really trying to sell a product.
No, we're not.
We're just having a good time. Now, if people like this and they enjoy learning with us, in listening to us, good, for I hope.
Challenging
but really,
us,
we're
perhaps.
just having a good time.
Yeah, no, we are. I said, perhaps challenging us.
Yes.
A struggle is, I think I at least try to be willing to change my mind, not change it so much that I've become just a chaff in the wind, to use a biblical analogy. But I think having intellectual humility is imperative for life itself. I think
the truth does not fear inquiry.
Yeah, exactly. So I've probably said a million things that perhaps looking back I'll be like, man, that was stupid. But we'll see.
No, man. You did great. You were a great interlocutor. I had a great discussion. Hopefully you did too.
I appreciate that, because likewise, you are a great conversationalist, someone who is able to expound upon very complex things. Yeah, so I'm excited. I think my biggest takeaway from this is excitement.
That's gonna be like a drug, man.
This has been very enjoyable,
Yes.
to say the least.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna go watch Salo, or 120 Days of Sodom. You know what that is? By Marquis de Sade. Have you heard de Sade?
It's one of those. Yeah, isn't it like it's an Italian film? Is it
Italian or French?
It's isn't it with like the experimental? Isn't it like an experimental? It's like a bunch of. They bring in a bunch of youths or something. Yeah.
And they just do whatever they want,
and it's like Lord of the Flies on steroids.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go watch that. I've never seen it. I'm gonna tell you how that works.
I'm gonna go do domestic things, probably make dinner and get ready for a child. But all right, man.
Cool. Hey, let's end the recording and then I'll
yeah, we'll chat. Okay, and stop